A strange arrival. Elliot Thomas had lived alone for the past 5 years. After a near-death experience during his final deployment overseas, he had retreated to the quiet mountains of the Pacific Northwest. His farm, isolated and overgrown, was a perfect place to forget the horrors of war. His days were filled with tending crops and the occasional visit to the nearby town for supplies. One evening, as the sun began to set and the forest around him grew dark, Elliot heard an unusual sound, a soft thud, like something crashing through the trees. He froze for a moment, instinctively reaching for the rifle that sat in a rack near the door. The noise was too odd to ignore. Carefully, he made his way toward the source of the sound, his boots crunching on the fallen leaves. As he neared the edge of the forest, he stopped dead in his tracks. There, lying among the trees, was a figure. At first glance, it seemed to be a woman, but something about her was off. She was covered in dirt and leaves, her hair wild and matted. Her skin had an otherworldly tint, like pale moonlight, and her eyes, those eyes, were silver, gleaming in the fading light. Despite her appearance, she was alive, breathing shallowly. Elliot's military instincts kicked in. He approached her cautiously, checking for any signs of danger. But she wasn't a threat. At least, not in the way he expected. She was just lost. His first thought was to take her to the local authorities, but something about her, something in the way she looked up at him with wide, confused eyes, stopped him. She was clearly a stranger to Earth, and that piqued his curiosity. "You, okay?" Elliot asked, his voice rough. She didn't respond at first, just stared at him, her silver eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and wonder. She was hungry, that much was clear. Sighing, Elliot made the decision to take her back to his home. He wasn't sure why, maybe it was compassion, maybe it was something else. But whatever the reason, he couldn't just leave her there. Over the next few days, Elliot worked to take care of her. He gave her food and water, and though she couldn't speak his language, they communicated through gestures and the occasional broken word she managed to say. She seemed different. Something about her wasn't human, and Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that he had just taken in something far more extraordinary than he realized. By the third day, Elliot had learned her name, Nara, though she still couldn't explain where she came from. He didn't press her for answers, understanding that whatever her past was, it was painful, and she wasn't ready to share it. But as the days passed, Elliot couldn't help but grow attached to her. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, mysterious, strong, and yet vulnerable. He couldn't explain why, but his protective instincts kicked in. He wanted to keep her safe. An unexpected bond. The days spent in the isolation of his farm were quiet, and Elliot found that he didn't mind the company of Nara. In fact, he began to look forward to their time together. She was unlike anyone he had ever known, and despite the language barrier, they formed a kind of silent understanding. Nara's ability to convey emotions through her eyes and gestures was uncanny, and somehow, they always seemed to find a way to communicate. Nara was a fast learner. Within a week, she was able to understand simple English phrases. At first, it had been difficult for her, her speech was fragmented, and she often mixed up words, but Elliot had patience. He helped her learn by teaching her the basics, names of objects, actions, simple sentences. She was quick, and soon their conversations became less stilted. Elliot would take her out to the barn during the day to show her how to tend to the animals. She learned quickly, following his every movement with curiosity and sharp observation. Her ability to adapt to Earth's customs and lifestyle seemed almost unnatural, and Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something more, something beyond her extraordinary capabilities. But he didn't press her, whatever secrets she held, she would share them in her own time. Nara, on the other hand, was increasingly fascinated by Elliot. She had never been around humans before. The inhabitants of her planet, Scythia, were far different in their behavior, their culture, and their way of life. Humans, with their emotional complexity, their warmth and vulnerability, intrigued her in ways she couldn't fully explain. Despite the painful loss she carried from her home planet's destruction, Nara couldn't help but feel a sense of safety in Elliot's presence. He was kind to her, even though he was distant. She could see the hurt in his eyes, the same kind of isolation she had once felt, but in him, there was something else. Something stronger than just loneliness. She felt the connection between them deepening with each passing day, and she found herself drawn to him in ways she couldn't understand. One evening, as they sat together by the fire in the small living room of Elliot's house, Nara gestured to the bright, full moon outside the window. She had learned its name in English, and her eyes glimmered with a quiet curiosity. "Elliot," she said, her voice still soft and uncertain, "moon. My world, no moon." She paused for a moment, as if contemplating something painful. "My people, no moon. We look to stars, to home." Elliot felt a pang of empathy. He knew she was missing her home, but he also understood the weight of that loss. He had lost so much in his own life, his friends, his purpose, and a sense of belonging. He wasn't sure if he could ever truly understand the depth of Nara's pain, but he knew what it was like to feel like you had nowhere left to go. "We all look to something, Nara," Elliot said quietly. "It's how we keep going. For you, it's the stars. For me, it's this farm." He gestured vaguely to the walls of the room, the place that had become his sanctuary. "But I'm here now. I don't know what your future holds, but you've got a place here with me, as long as you need it." Nara's silver eyes softened, and she looked down at the floor for a moment. Then, to Elliot's surprise, she reached over and took his hand in both of hers. Her touch was warm, almost comforting. There was something innocent and vulnerable about it, but also something that made his heart ache in a way he hadn't expected. Elliot hesitated before speaking again. "Nara, you've been through a lot. You've lost everything. Your planet, your people." He searched her face, trying to find the right words. "I'm not sure what I can do to help you find your way home, but I'll do what I can. I'm not going to leave you alone in this." Her fingers tightened around his hand, and she finally spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to be alone anymore, Elliot. But I'm afraid. If I stay, if I let myself care, what happens when you leave?" The word struck Elliot like a blow. She was scared that if she let herself get too close, he would eventually leave her, just like everyone else. His heart sank, and he understood all too well. He'd built walls around himself for years, afraid of letting anyone in. And now, here she was, someone who had nothing left to hold on to, reaching out to him in a way that made him feel both terrified and honored. "I'm not going anywhere, Nara," he said softly, squeezing her hand gently. "I don't know what the future holds, but you're not alone anymore. Not while I'm here." Nara's eyes shimmered as she held his gaze. There was so much unspoken between them, so much shared pain and longing. But in that moment, it seemed like maybe they had found something to hold on to. The next morning, Elliot woke up early to the sound of birds chirping and the rustling of the trees outside. He stretched and rubbed his eyes, but as he reached for his boots, he noticed Nara standing by the window, staring out at the landscape. "Morning," Elliot said, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Nara turned toward him, her eyes flickering with curiosity. "Morning, Elliot." Elliot walked over and stood beside her. She gestured toward the sky, her eyes scanning the expanse of trees and mountains. "I like it here. I feel safe." Elliot's heart gave a slight flutter at the words. Safe. It was the first time he had heard her say that, and it made him feel something he wasn't ready to confront. "You are safe here," he said. "But we still don't know what's next. I know you want to get back to your people, Nara, but I don't know how to make that happen. I can't promise you I have the answers, but I'll help you figure it out." Nara nodded, a small, uncertain smile crossing her lips. "I trust you. I want to stay. I want to learn more." She paused, her voice softer. "About Earth. About you. The weight of her words lingered in the air, and Elliot felt his chest tighten. He had spent so much time pushing people away, convinced that he was better off alone. But with Nara, something was different. She wasn't just a stranger he was helping, she had become something more. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, he was willing to find out. Days turned into weeks, and their bond continued to grow. Nara became more comfortable on the farm, helping Elliot with the daily tasks and even cooking meals for him. Though she didn't know all the customs, she tried her best to understand and adapt. And Elliot, though still guarded, found himself relying on her companionship more and more. But as they spent time together, a feeling began to take root in Elliot's heart, a feeling he couldn't ignore, no matter how much he tried to fight it. Nara had come into his life unexpectedly, and in that unexpected arrival, she had given him something he thought he had lost forever, hope. And maybe, just maybe, in the strange, unfamiliar bond they had forged, there was the possibility of something even more. The truth of her past. The early mornings at the farm had become a routine for both Elliot and Nara. She woke up with the dawn, eager to help with the chores, and Elliot found himself growing accustomed to the rhythm of their days together. There was something comforting about the simplicity of it all, the quiet work, the steady flow of life. But despite the outward peace, Elliot knew that Nara was struggling with something deep inside her. He could see it in the way she would pause, her gaze lingering on the horizon, as though searching for something she couldn't quite reach. Elliot didn't push her to talk. He knew she wasn't ready, and maybe she never would be. But over time, it became clear to him that there was more to Nara's story than she had let on. She was still haunted by something, some memory she kept locked away, a shadow that clung to her even on the sunniest of days. One evening, as the two of them sat on the porch after a long day of work, Nara seemed quieter than usual. She was staring up at the stars, her expression unreadable. Elliot had grown used to her silences, but tonight, something felt different. There was a heaviness in the air that he couldn't ignore. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Nara," he began softly, "I know you've been through a lot. I can see it in your eyes. You don't have to tell me if you're not ready, but I want you to know that you're not alone. You don't have to carry all of this by yourself." She turned her head to look at him, and for a moment, their eyes locked. There was a vulnerability in her gaze that struck him deeply. She looked at him as though he were a lifeline, someone she could finally trust. And maybe for the first time, Elliot truly believed she would tell him everything. Slowly, Nara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "My people, they are gone. My planet, Scythia, was destroyed." She paused, taking in a shaky breath. "I was one of the last to leave, but I got separated from my team during the escape. I've been alone ever since." Elliot's heart ached as he listened to her words. He had known, in some deep, unspoken way, that her past was more complicated than she had let on, but hearing her finally voice the truth was something else entirely. She wasn't just a stranger from another world, she was someone who had lost everything. She was the last of her kind, a lone survivor of a tragedy that had shattered her world. "I'm sorry," Elliot said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't imagine what that must have been like." Nara's eyes glistened as she blinked back tears, but she didn't allow them to fall. "It's okay," she said, shaking her head. "I've learned to survive. But it's hard. It's hard to be the only one left." Elliot didn't know what to say to that. He had lost people too, people he had cared about, people who had meant the world to him. But to lose an entire world, an entire civilization, was beyond anything he could comprehend. "Did you?" Elliot hesitated, unsure if he was overstepping, but he needed to understand. "Did you have anyone? A family, friends, people you loved?" Nara's gaze fell to the ground, and for a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, in a voice barely audible, she said, "I had a sister. Her name was Lyra. We were very close. She was everything to me. But she," her voice faltered, and she closed her eyes for a moment, as though trying to block out the memories. She didn't survive the attack. I was supposed to protect her, but I couldn't. I was too late. Elliot's heart broke for her. The pain in her voice was so raw, so real, that it felt like a knife to his own chest. He couldn't imagine losing someone he loved, let alone an entire world. And yet here she was, still standing, still fighting to survive in a place she didn't belong. "I'm sorry, Nara," Elliot said quietly. "I can't imagine the kind of loss you've been through. But I promise you, you're not alone now. I'll help you. I'll help you find a way back, or at least," he stopped himself, unsure how to finish the sentence, "I'll help you make sense of this new life." Nara's eyes shimmered as she looked up at him, and for the first time since he had met her, there was a faint, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. "Thank you, Elliot. You don't know what this means to me." As the night grew darker, Elliot and Nara sat in silence, both lost in their thoughts. The weight of her words hung in the air, but there was also a strange sense of peace between them now, a quiet understanding. Elliot knew that Nara's journey was far from over, that the pain of her past would never truly go away, but for the first time, he felt like he was finally beginning to understand her, to see her for who she truly was. She wasn't just a broken soul from another world, she was someone who had endured unimaginable loss and still had the strength to keep moving forward. And as for Elliot, he couldn't help but wonder if, in helping Nara heal, he might begin to heal himself too. The next few weeks were filled with more conversations about Nara's past, though she was still hesitant to speak of it in too much detail. Elliot gave her space, never pressing her to open up further than she was ready. But each time she shared another piece of her history, he found himself growing more and more attached to her. One evening, as they worked in the garden, Nara finally mentioned something that had been weighing on her mind. "Elliot," she said, pausing as she dug into the soil, I think I need to find a way to leave." Elliot turned to her, confusion written across his face. "Leave? But, you've only just started adjusting to Earth. You don't have to leave, Nara. You're safe here." Nara looked up at him, her silver eyes filled with an intensity he hadn't seen before. "I'm grateful for everything you've done for me. But Earth is not my home. My people are gone, and I have no way to return to them. But I need to find something, someone, anything that will help me understand who I am now. I can't stay here forever." Elliot's heart sank. He had known that Nara's time with him was temporary, that she was still searching for her purpose, for a sense of belonging. But hearing her say it so plainly hit him harder than he expected. "I get it," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of her words. "But you don't have to do this alone. I'll help you. I'll help you figure out what comes next." Nara smiled faintly, the first real smile Elliot had seen in a long time. "I know. And I'm grateful. But I think it's time for me to start facing my past. I need to know what happened to my world, and why I survived when so many didn't." Elliot didn't argue. He knew there was no stopping her from seeking answers, from finding a way to move forward. But as she turned her gaze back toward the horizon, Elliot couldn't help but wonder where this path would lead her, and whether he would be able to follow her into whatever future she chose. The journey beyond. The days following Nara's declaration were filled with a tension Elliot couldn't shake. He had always known that Nara's time with him was not meant to be permanent, but hearing her express her need to leave struck a chord deep within him. The bond they had formed in such a short amount of time had become something real, something he had not anticipated. And now, she was ready to leave, to face her past and seek the truth of what had happened to her world. Elliot had always prided himself on being self-sufficient, on keeping his emotions guarded and protected. But Nara had changed that. She had slipped under his defenses in a way no one else ever had, and now the thought of her leaving, of losing her, felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. He woke early the next morning, long before the sun had risen, as was his habit. But today, instead of heading out to the fields or tending to the animals, he found himself standing by the window, looking out at the land stretching before him. It was the same landscape he had always known, yet it felt different now. It felt incomplete. When he turned around, he saw Nara standing in the doorway. She had been awake for a while, her dark eyes watching him with a quiet intensity. There was a sense of finality in the air, something he couldn't deny. She had made up her mind, and nothing was going to stop her now. "I'm leaving today," she said softly, her voice steady but not without a hint of uncertainty. "I think it's time for me to find my way." Elliot swallowed hard, the lump in his throat threatening to choke him. He had known this was coming, but now that it was happening, he wasn't sure what to say. The words felt inadequate, like a million things he wanted to express but couldn't quite find the right way to frame. "I understand," he said finally, his voice low. "But I'll go with you. If you want. I'm not going to let you go alone." Nara shook her head, her silver eyes glimmering with a mix of gratitude and resolve. "No. You've done more for me than anyone ever has. You gave me shelter, a place to heal. But this is something I have to do on my own. I can't keep relying on you." Elliot felt a twinge in his chest at the finality in her words. He had always believed that he had control over his life, that he could dictate his future. But now, standing here in front of Nara, he realized that he had no more control over his own emotions than he did over the tides. "I get it," Elliot said, his voice tight. "I won't stop you. But I'll be here for you, Nara. No matter what." Nara stepped forward, her hand reaching out as if to touch his arm, but she hesitated. It was as though she wasn't sure whether to make the contact or not, torn between her own feelings and the need to remain independent. Finally, she placed her hand on his arm, and the warmth of her touch sent a wave of electricity through him. "I will never forget what you've done for me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." Her words hit him hard, and for a brief moment, Elliot's heart ached with the realization that they might never see each other again. But at the same time, he knew he couldn't stand in the way of her journey. She had to find her own answers, even if it meant leaving him behind. Nara spent the rest of the morning preparing for her departure. She packed a small bag with the few belongings she had left, the clothes Elliot had given her, the items she had collected during her time on Earth. She didn't need much. She had already lost everything she had known, and now all she could take with her were the memories of what once was. Elliot helped her gather the supplies, though he remained mostly silent. He couldn't find the right words to say, and part of him was afraid to speak at all. He didn't want to admit how much he would miss her, how much he had come to rely on her presence in his life. The silence between them was deafening. When everything was packed, Nara stood at the edge of the porch, looking out over the land one last time. Elliot joined her, standing beside her, but not speaking. There was nothing left to say. He had done everything he could for her, and now the time had come for her to leave. "I'll be fine," Nara said, her voice soft but resolute. "I know what I need to do. And I have a feeling that someday, our paths will cross again." Elliot couldn't speak. His throat tightened, and the words wouldn't come. He simply nodded, his eyes locking with hers. For a moment, there was no need for words. There was only the shared understanding between them, an understanding that was born from their connection, their shared experiences. No matter how far she went, they would always be a part of each other. Without another word, Nara turned and began to walk down the path that led away from the house. Elliot watched her, feeling a sense of loss so profound that it almost made him ache. She was leaving, but he knew that no matter how far she traveled, she would always carry a piece of him with her. And he, in turn, would always carry a piece of her. As Nara walked through the fields, the weight of her decision pressed down on her. She had no idea where she was going, what she would find, or how long it would take her to uncover the truth of her past. But one thing was certain, she couldn't stay where she had found solace. She had to find herself, find her own way forward. For the first time in a long while, Nara felt a flicker of hope. She had been lost for so long, drifting from place to place, unsure of what her future would hold. But now, with the knowledge that she was not alone in the world, at least, not entirely, she felt ready to face whatever came next. She looked back once, toward the house that had been her sanctuary, and saw Elliot standing in the doorway, watching her. Their eyes met for a moment, and in that brief exchange, Nara knew that the bond between them was unbreakable. No matter where her journey took her, Elliot would always be a part of her story. And as she turned back toward the unknown, Nara felt a strange sense of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. The unexpected return. The road ahead was uncertain. Nara had set out on her own, determined to uncover the truth about her past, about the destruction of Scythia, and what had really happened to her people. She didn't know where she was going, but with every step she took, the weight of her history pressed harder on her shoulders. She had spent too long running, hiding from her own past, and now, for the first time, she was determined to face it head-on. It had been a few days since she left the farm, and she had traveled through quiet, winding paths, past forests and across fields. The beauty of Earth, its peacefulness, almost made her feel like she could belong here. But then the memories of her lost world, the sight of her burning planet, the faces of the friends and family she had lost, would rush back to her, reminding her that Earth was not home. It was just a place, a temporary stop on her journey to find the answers she had been searching for. As she walked, Nara couldn't help but think of Elliot. His words had stayed with her, "I'll help you. I'll help you figure out what comes next." They had been a comfort, but also a burden. She couldn't keep relying on him, not when her own heart was still so broken, still so full of unresolved pain. Nara had come to care for him more than she had ever expected, and that scared her. She wasn't ready to confront that part of herself, not yet. Days turned into a week, and Nara's journey took her to the outskirts of a bustling town. The first night she spent in a small inn, her stomach tight with unease as she lay in the bed. She wasn't used to being around so many people, and the noise of the town outside made her feel exposed. But she had no choice. The trail was growing colder, and the answers she sought seemed to be slipping further away. It was time to find someone who might know more about what had happened to Scythia. The next morning, Nara set out again, her mind swirling with possibilities. She couldn't keep running forever. The people she needed to find, the truth she needed to uncover, were all out there somewhere. And the only way to get there was to keep moving forward. 2 weeks later, Nara found herself on a rocky cliff, overlooking the vast expanse of the ocean below. It was here, in a small coastal village, that she met someone who changed the course of her journey. Her name was Lyra. She was an archaeologist, studying ancient civilizations and artifacts that had been long forgotten. It wasn't long into their conversation that Nara realized Lyra had knowledge of something she had only heard whispers of before, the destruction of Scythia. It was as though the universe had placed Lyra in her path for a reason. "You're from Scythia?" Lyra asked, her voice low, filled with awe and a hint of fear. "I've heard stories, but no one has ever confirmed them. I've been studying old texts, pieces of alien technology, and there are records that suggest your world was destroyed by a cataclysmic event. But it wasn't just an accident. It was something much darker." Nara's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What happened to Scythia?" Lyra stepped closer, her eyes scanning the horizon as though looking for something hidden in the distance. "There are ancient texts, fragments of information, that point to a weapon of unimaginable power. It said that an alien race, much older than your people, had a hand in it. They had the technology to destroy entire planets, to erase entire civilizations." Nara's stomach churned. She had suspected something dark had happened, something far beyond her understanding. But to hear it confirmed, there were no words for it. Her world, her home, had been destroyed by something far more powerful than she could have ever imagined. "Do you know who did this?" Nara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lyra paused, her gaze flickering with uncertainty. I think I know who's behind it. But it's not something I can prove. Not yet. I've been gathering information, but it's dangerous. Whoever is behind this is powerful. They don't want the truth getting out. The silence between them stretched as Nara processed the information. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. Her world hadn't been destroyed by accident, by some natural disaster. No, it had been destroyed by an intentional, calculated force. Whoever was behind it wanted to erase everything, to wipe out a civilization. What do I do now? Nara asked, her voice shaking. Lyra looked at her, her expression sympathetic but firm. You can't do this alone. You need help. And I think I know where you might find it. There are groups, secret organizations, that have been investigating this. They know more than I do. They have access to information that's been hidden for centuries. If you want to find the truth, you'll need to find them. Nara's eyes hardened with resolve. Where do I start? Lyra pulled out a small device from her pocket, a sleek, silver piece of technology that looked out of place in the rustic environment. This is a contact device, she said, handing it to Nara. It'll connect you to the people I've been working with. They can help you. But you'll need to be careful. Trust no one, Nara. These people, they have their own agendas. But they can give you the answers you're looking for. Nara took the device, feeling a strange sense of urgency. The truth was within her grasp, but it was also dangerous. It felt like the world was shifting beneath her feet, and she didn't know whether to be terrified or relieved. She had spent so long feeling lost, feeling like an alien in a world that was not her own. But now, there was a new direction, one that could lead her to the answers she had been searching for. As Nara walked away from the cliffs and toward the unknown, she realized something. She wasn't just searching for her past anymore. She was searching for justice, for those she had lost, for the people of Scythia, and for herself. But as she set out on this new path, a thought lingered in her mind. She had left Elliot behind. And even though she had told herself it was the right thing to do, the truth was more complicated than she had let on. Elliot had been her anchor, her comfort, and letting him go had been one of the hardest things she had ever done. But she had to stay focused. She couldn't let anything, no matter how much it hurt, distract her from what she had to do. And somewhere deep inside, Nara couldn't help but wonder, would she ever see Elliot again? Would their paths cross once more in this vast, uncertain universe? As the horizon stretched out before her, Nara knew the answers were waiting. The journey ahead was uncertain, dangerous even, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the right path. The truth was out there, and she would find it, no matter the cost. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a place to call home once again.